My name is Aria. I'm 35 years old, and until last month, I was paying the mortgage on my parents' $830,000 house. I always thought family meant supporting each other through thick and thin. That's what I was doing all these years, working 60-hour weeks in real estate while sending them checks every month. Then I heard what they really thought of me. Before I share how my world crumbled when I heard what my father really thought of me, tell me where you're watching from in the comments and subscribe if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you loved. Trust me, what happened next changed everything. I grew up in a first-generation American household. My parents, James and Margaret, emigrated from Eastern Europe before I was born, determined to give their children the American dream they never had. But that dream came with impossible expectations, especially for me. From my earliest memories, nothing I did was ever good enough for my father. If I brought home straight A's, he'd ask why I didn't get extra credit. If I won second place in a competition, he'd wonder aloud why I couldn't be first. His criticism was constant, his approval non-existent. Aria in this country second place might as well be last, he would say, his accent thickening with disappointment. You must be number one or you are nothing. My mother Margaret never challenged him. She would silently serve dinner while he lectured me about my inadequacies, occasionally adding a soft, "Listen to your father, he only wants what's best for you." She was his echo, never his equal. Then there was my younger brother Thomas, 4 years my junior and somehow perfect in my father's eyes. When Thomas brought home B's and C's, he was praised for his well-rounded approach to school. When he quit the basketball team because it was too much pressure, my father nodded understandingly. Thomas could do no wrong. I still remember the day Thomas crashed our family car 3 months after getting his license. My father put his arm around him and said, "Cars can be fixed. I'm just glad you're safe." 2 years earlier, when I had a minor fender bender, my father didn't speak to me for 2 weeks and made me work off every penny of the repair. Despite the double standard, or perhaps because of it, I was determined to prove myself. I graduated at the top of my class in high school and earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university. I studied business thinking my father would finally be proud of me following in his footsteps. He owned a small import business that had provided for our family, and I thought he'd want me to build on that foundation. I was wrong. Business degree. What will you do with that? You should have studied medicine or law, something respectable. He scoffed when I showed him my diploma. Business is for men who know how to negotiate. You're too soft. Instead of breaking me, his words fueled me. I had discovered a passion for real estate during an internship my junior year. The combination of personal connection with clients and the analytical side of property valuation clicked with something inside me. I decided to pursue it despite my father's disapproval. The early years were tough. I lived in a tiny studio apartment with barely functioning air conditioning, putting every spare dollar into building my client base and reputation. Meanwhile, I noticed my parents' bills piling up during my monthly visits. Thomas had decided college wasn't for him and moved back home at 20, working part-time at the local mall and spending most of his paycheck on video games and going out with friends. My father's business was struggling too. The economy had shifted, import regulations had changed, and he refused to adapt his business model. His pride wouldn't let him admit he needed help, but I could see the past due notices when I visited. "I can help with some of the bills," I offered during one particularly tense dinner where my mother served smaller portions than usual. "We don't need charity," my father snapped. But the next day, my mother called in tears. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage. The house that they'd worked so hard for, the beautiful 4-bedroom colonial with the wraparound porch in a good school district, was at risk of foreclosure. "Your father would never ask, but if you could help just this once," she pleaded. That "just this once" turned into 8 years of me covering their $3,000 monthly mortgage payment. 8 years of sacrifice while I built my business. 8 years of "just until your father's business picks up again," or "just until Thomas finds a better job." The house was worth $830,000 according to recent appraisals. A house I paid for but never lived in as an adult. A house where my childhood bedroom had been converted into Thomas's gaming room once I left for college. The irony was that as my real estate career finally began to flourish, my father's resentment seemed to grow. Each success I shared was met with a dismissive, "You got lucky," or "Anyone could sell a house in this market." When I won Realtor of the Year in our county, he didn't even come to the ceremony claiming he had inventory to manage. Thomas told me later he'd been home watching sports all evening. Still, I persisted in seeking his approval. Like a child reaching for a toy on a shelf that's deliberately placed too high, I kept stretching, believing that someday, if I just reached a little farther, I'd finally grasp that elusive prize, my father's pride in me. Last month, I received news that could change my career trajectory forever. Jackson Properties, one of the most prestigious real estate development firms in our state, wanted to meet with me about heading up their new residential division. It would mean more money, more prestige, and validation of everything I'd worked for. My first instinct, despite years of disappointment, was to share the news with my family. Looking back, I wish I'd called anyone else. I had 30 minutes before my meeting with Jackson Properties when I decided to call my parents. I was buzzing with excitement, pacing around my office in the sleek black dress and pearls I'd chosen specifically to project confidence in my upcoming meeting. The phone rang 4 times before my father picked up with a gruff, "Hello." I could hear the television blaring in the background, some sports commentary that apparently deserved more attention than the call. "Hi, Dad, it's Arya. I have amazing news." I tried to keep the childlike eagerness out of my voice but failed. "Arya, yes. What is it? I'm in the middle of something." He didn't lower the TV volume. I pressed on, determined to share my moment. "Jackson Properties wants me to head up their new residential division. It's a huge opportunity, Dad. They're the biggest developer in the state." There was a pause, then a non-committal, "That's nice." My enthusiasm deflated slightly, but I was used to this. I kept going. "The salary is nearly double what I'm making now, plus equity in the projects I oversee. This is what I've been working toward all these years." "Good, good," he replied, clearly distracted. "Maybe now you can focus on settling down, finding a husband. You're not getting any younger, you know." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. Even my biggest professional achievement had to be redirected to my failure to meet his expectations in my personal life. I was about to respond when he interrupted. "Someone's at the door. I need to go." "Oh, okay. Maybe we can have dinner this weekend to celebrate. I could make reservations at that Italian place you like," I offered, still trying. "Yes, fine. I have to go now." His tone was impatient. I heard shuffling, then what sounded like the phone being set down on a hard surface. I expected to hear the call disconnect, but instead I heard footsteps walking away. He'd forgotten to hang up. I was about to end the call myself when I heard his voice again, now more distant, but suddenly animated in a way it never was with me. "Thomas, when did you get home? I thought you were working today." My brother's voice. "Nah, called in sick. Didn't feel like dealing with customers. What's for lunch?" "Your mother's making sandwiches. Was that your sister on the phone?" I should have hung up. Every instinct told me to press the red button on my screen and focus on my upcoming meeting, but something kept my finger hovering, not disconnecting. "Yeah, what did Ms. Perfect want this time to brag about another commission?" Thomas laughed, and then I heard words that would permanently alter the foundation of my life. "She got some new job offer, acting like it's some big achievement." My father's voice lowered, but not enough. "She's nothing but a failure. Should have never been born." The air left my lungs as if I'd been punched. I sank into my office chair, phone clutched so tightly my knuckles whitened. "James, don't say such things," my mother's voice interjected, but with no real conviction. "Why not? It's true. All her so-called success, and what does she have to show for it? No husband, no children, just money. As if that's what matters. She's an embarrassment to this family with her independent woman nonsense." "At least she pays the bills," my mother said quietly. My brother laughed. "Yeah, and we should keep letting her. She's stupid enough to do it. Can you believe she's been paying the mortgage all these years thinking she's helping us out temporarily? Meanwhile, Dad's business has been doing fine for the last 3 years." "Lower your voice," my father said, though he was chuckling too. "It's her own fault for trying to show off how successful she is. Might as well get something useful out of her since she's such a disappointment otherwise." I still can't believe she fell for it when you said the business was struggling, Thomas continued. All those fancy real estate classes, and she never even asked to see the mortgage paperwork. Turns out Little Miss Perfect isn't so smart after all. The best part is, her name isn't even on the deed, my father said proudly. Just the mortgage, all the responsibility, none of the ownership. That's what happens when you sign papers without a lawyer. I felt physically ill. With shaking hands, I pressed the record button on my phone, capturing their continuing conversation about how they'd manipulated me for years, how my father had deliberately undermined every achievement to keep me seeking his approval and continuing to support them, how they laughed about the sacrifices I'd made, the vacations I hadn't taken, the nicer apartment I hadn't rented all so I could send them money every month. It's almost sad how desperate she is for your approval, Dad, Thomas said. She'd probably give you a kidney if you asked for it. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that, my father replied. I doubt hers would be any good anyway. They all laughed. I hung up the phone and ran to the private bathroom attached to my office, barely making it before I threw up. As I knelt on the cold tile floor, my entire life reorganized itself in my mind. Every memory recontextualized, every sacrifice reframed as exploitation. The worst part wasn't that they'd taken advantage of me financially. It was knowing that while I desperately sought their love, they'd been laughing at me behind my back. The family I'd sacrificed so much for had never existed, except in my hopes. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder. 5 minutes until my meeting with Jackson Properties. I rinsed my mouth, fixed my makeup with mechanical precision, and walked into the conference room with a smile that felt painted on. Somehow, I made it through that meeting. I answered questions about market projections and development strategies, while part of my brain continued to process the betrayal. I even managed to impress them enough to be asked back for a second meeting. But as I drove home that evening, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The facade had cracked, and through that crack I could finally see the truth. It was time to stop being the dutiful daughter who kept reaching for approval that would never come. It was time to become someone else entirely. I didn't go home after the meeting. I couldn't bear to sit alone in my apartment with only my thoughts and that devastating recording. Instead, I drove straight to Jessica's house. Jessica had been my best friend since college, the one person who had consistently questioned my family's treatment of me over the years. "They're using you, Arya," she would say. "Families don't treat each other this way." I'd always defended them, making excuses about cultural differences, my father's difficult upbringing, or the pressures of immigrant life. Now I realized Jessica had seen the truth all along. When she opened her door, one look at my face told her something was terribly wrong. I collapsed into her arms, sobbing in a way I hadn't allowed myself to cry since I was a small child. Between gasps, I told her everything and played the recording. Jessica's face transformed from concern to fury as she listened. Those manipulative, abusive, she couldn't even finish the sentence. "Arya, this ends now, today." But ending it wasn't as simple as making a decision. Years of emotional conditioning don't disappear in an instant. That night at Jessica's, I cycled through denial, anger, and desperate bargaining with myself. Maybe they were just having a bad day. Maybe they didn't mean it. How could they do this to me after everything I've done for them? If I just work harder, achieve more, maybe then they'll finally see my worth. Jessica sat with me through it all, offering tissues, wine, and eventually clarity. "You need to talk to someone professional about this," she said. "I know a therapist who specializes in family trauma. Her name is Dr. Lauren." I was resistant at first. In my family's culture, therapy was seen as a weakness, something for people who couldn't handle their problems. But Jessica persisted, and 2 days later, I found myself in Dr. Lauren's warm, sunlit office. Dr. Lauren didn't look like the stern clinical psychologist I'd imagined. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner that somehow put me at ease. I played the recording for her, feeling the shame and hurt wash over me again. "What you're describing is a pattern of narcissistic abuse," she said after listening. "Your father displays classic narcissistic behaviors, your mother is what we call an enabler, and your brother has been groomed to be what we term the golden child." She explained how, in such family dynamics, there's often a scapegoat, the family member who bears the blame for everything and whose role is to make the narcissist feel superior. That was me. But they're my family, I whispered. How do I just walk away? Family should be where you feel safest, most loved, and most accepted, Dr. Lauren replied. What you've described isn't family, it's exploitation. And it's not your failure that you weren't loved properly. It's theirs. Over the next few sessions, we began to untangle the complex web of emotions and obligations I felt toward my family. Dr. Lauren helped me see that what I thought was love was actually an unhealthy attachment based on seeking validation I would never receive. Meanwhile, I began to investigate the financial situation more thoroughly. I pulled my credit report and discovered that my name was indeed on the mortgage as the primary borrower, but not on the property deed. I'd been so eager to help 8 years ago that I hadn't questioned the paperwork my father had asked me to sign. I'd trusted him completely. I met with a financial advisor who helped me calculate exactly how much I'd given my family over the years. The mortgage payments alone totaled nearly $300,000. Add in the emergency car repairs, the vacations I'd helped fund Thomas's brief stint at community college before he dropped out, and countless other expenses, and the total approached $400,000. Money I could have invested in my own future, a down payment on my own home, retirement savings, adventures I'd put off because I couldn't afford them while supporting my family. The financial reality was staggering, but the emotional betrayal cut deeper. Each night I lay awake replaying conversations, remembering moments when I'd seen flashes of their true feelings, but had quickly dismissed them. The way my father's smile never reached his eyes when I shared good news. The subtle exchanges of glances between my mother and brother when I talked about my work. The jokes that had a bite to them, always at my expense. My work began to suffer. I was distracted, emotional, making small mistakes that weren't like me. The follow-up meeting with Jackson Properties was postponed at my request. I needed time to sort myself out before making any major career decisions. Jessica checked on me daily, bringing food when I couldn't motivate myself to cook, listening when I needed to talk, sitting in silence when I didn't. One evening, as we picked at takeout Thai food in my living room, she asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What are you going to do about the house payments?" I pushed a piece of tofu around with my fork. "I don't know. I can't keep paying knowing what I know now. But if I stop..." "They're adults, Arya. Your father's business is doing fine according to what you overheard. They can pay their own mortgage." "But what if they can't? What if they lose the house? I'd be responsible." Jessica put her container down and looked me straight in the eyes. "You're not responsible for housing your ungrateful family. You never were. And now it's time to start thinking about what you want." What did I want? The question reverberated through me. For so long, my wants had been secondary to earning my father's approval and meeting my family's needs. I hardly knew how to want things for myself anymore. But as the days passed and my sessions with Dr. Lauren continued, one thing became increasingly clear. I wanted freedom. Freedom from the financial burden. Freedom from the emotional manipulation. Freedom to build a life that wasn't measured by my father's impossible standards. And to get that freedom, I would have to confront them. A week after overhearing the call, I decided it was time. Dr. Lauren helped me prepare for the confrontation role, playing potential scenarios and helping me establish boundaries for the conversation. "Remember, you can't control how they'll react," she cautioned. "You can only control your own responses, and it's okay to leave if it becomes too much." I chose Sunday dinner for the confrontation. It was a family tradition I'd maintained despite my busy schedule, driving to their house every other Sunday to share a meal that my mother would spend all day preparing, pretending we were the happy family I'd always wanted us to be. I arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, the familiar weight of dread settling in my stomach as I walked up the porch steps. This house, with its perfect lawn and freshly painted shutters, had been my childhood home. Now I saw it for what it really was, a prison of expectations I could never meet, maintained with money I'd earned while being despised. My mother answered the door, wiping her hands on her apron. "Arya, you're right on time. I made your favorite pot roast." It wasn't my favorite. It was Thomas's. Another small detail that suddenly seemed significant. My father sat in his recliner watching basketball, barely acknowledging my arrival with a grunt. Thomas lounged on the couch, phone in hand, looking up only long enough to say, "Hey sis, how's the real estate business selling any mansions lately?" The casual mockery in his tone was obvious now that I was listening for it. How had I missed it all these years? Dinner proceeded with the usual routine. My father dominated the conversation, talking about people from their church I barely knew, local politics, and Thomas's prospects at his job where he'd recently been considered for assistant manager at the electronics store. My mother served and smiled. I picked at my food and waited. When the plates were cleared and my mother brought out apple pie, I knew it was time. I placed my phone on the table and looked at each of them. "I need to play something for you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Can't it wait?" "The game's back on in 5 minutes," my father complained. "No, it can't wait. I've waited long enough." The firmness in my tone caused all three of them to look at me with surprise. I wasn't playing my usual role of eager-to-please daughter. I pressed play on the recording. The sound of my father's voice filled the dining room. "She's nothing but a failure. Should have never been born." The color drained from my mother's face. Thomas froze with a forkful of pie halfway to his mouth. My father's expression shifted from confusion to anger as the recording continued playing back their cruel words and mocking laughter. When it finished, silence descended on the room like a heavy curtain. I let it stretch, watching them squirm, waiting for someone to break it. My father recovered first, his face reddening. "You were spying on us, recording private conversations. How dare you?" "I wasn't spying. You forgot to hang up the phone." "But that's not the point, is it? The point is that everything you said was true. How you really feel about me. How you've been manipulating me for years." "You're overreacting," my mother said, her voice quavering. "Your father didn't mean those things. He was just having a bad day." "Don't lie to me anymore, Mom. I heard all of you. You've been laughing at me behind my back while I paid your bills. Using me while despising me." Thomas tried a different approach. "Come on, sis. Everyone vents about family sometimes. You know we love you." "Do you?" "Because it doesn't sound like love to me. It sounds like exploitation." I turned to my father, who was now standing looming over the table like he did when I was a child and had disappointed him. "You said I was nothing but a failure, that I should never have been born. Is that love, Dad?" "If you can't take a little criticism, that's your problem," he snapped. "After everything we've done for you, giving you a good home education opportunities, and this is how you repay us, with accusations and recordings." I laughed, a hollow sound that surprised even me. "What exactly have you done for me lately?" "Dad, I've been paying your mortgage for 8 years. I've funded Thomas's failed attempts at education, Mom's kitchen renovation, your car repairs. I've given you nearly $400,000 while you called me a failure behind my back." "We gave you life," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "We sacrificed everything to come to this country and give you opportunities. And I've been paying that debt my entire life," I replied calmly. "But the account is closed now." "What is that supposed to mean?" my mother asked, tears forming in her eyes. Always the tears when confrontation happened. "It means I'm done. No more mortgage payments, no more handouts, no more desperate attempts to earn love that was never there." My father's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "If you can't respect this family and the sacrifices we've made for you, then you're not welcome here anymore." "That's where you're wrong, Dad. This is actually my house, legally speaking. I'm the primary borrower on the mortgage. I've been making the payments, and as of tomorrow, I'm putting it on the market." The shock on their faces would have been comical if it wasn't so tragic. None of them had considered that the power dynamic had shifted, that the daughter they'd manipulated for so long had finally seen behind the curtain. "You can't do that," my father spluttered. "This is our home." "Actually, I can. I've spoken to a lawyer. Since I'm on the mortgage but not the deed, I have legal options. You committed fraud by putting me on the mortgage without giving me ownership. I could press charges, but I won't. Instead, I'm selling the house, recouping my investment, and moving on with my life." My mother began to sob openly now. "Where will we go? How will we live?" "The same way other adults do, Mom. You'll find a place you can actually afford and pay for it yourselves." I stood up and gathered my purse. You have 30 days to find new housing. My real estate colleague Sophia will be handling the sale to avoid any conflict of interest. She'll be in touch to arrange viewings. You ungrateful bitch, Thomas snarled, finally dropping his nice guy act. After everything this family has done for you. I looked at my younger brother, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. A 31-year-old man who'd never had to work hard for anything, who'd been taught that the world owed him success simply for existing. Goodbye, Thomas. I hope someday you learn what it means to stand on your own 2 feet. I walked out of that house with my head high, ignoring my father's threats and my mother's pleas. As I got into my car, I felt something crack open inside me, something that had been sealed tight for decades. Grief poured out, but underneath it was something unexpected relief. The weight of seeking their approval had been lifted. I was free. The week that followed was a whirlwind of activity and emotion. First thing Monday morning, I met with Amanda, a lawyer Jessica had recommended who specialized in real estate law and family disputes. Let me get this straight, Amanda said, reviewing the mortgage documents I'd brought. You've been making payments on this property for 8 years, but your name is only on the mortgage, not the deed. Yes, I trusted my father to handle the paperwork. He said it was faster that way, that he'd add me to the deed later. I never followed up. I felt foolish saying it out loud. Amanda adjusted her glasses. Unfortunately, this is more common than you'd think. Parents using their children's credit and income without giving them ownership. It's a form of financial abuse. We discussed my options. I could fight for partial ownership based on my contributions, file fraud charges against my father, or use my position as the mortgage holder to force a sale. The cleanest option is the sale, Amanda advised. You're the one legally responsible for the debt, so you have the right to protect your financial interest. Since you can demonstrate that you've been making the payments, you have a strong claim to the proceeds up to the amount you've contributed. With her guidance, I drafted a formal notice to my parents outlining the situation and the timeline for the sale. Amanda delivered it personally to ensure they couldn't claim they hadn't received it. Next, I contacted Sophia, a colleague from a different real estate agency, to avoid any conflict of interest. She agreed to list the property and handle all interactions with my family. It was priced aggressively at $830,000 under market value to ensure a quick sale in a neighborhood where houses typically sat for months. We'll stage an open house this weekend, Sophia told me. With this location and the updated kitchen, it should attract multiple offers. Meanwhile, my family launched their counterattack. The calls and texts began almost immediately after Amanda delivered the legal notice. My father's messages were threatening. You'll regret this betrayal. No daughter of mine would do this to her family. I've spoken to a lawyer of my own. You have no right to sell this house. Your reputation will be ruined when people find out what you've done to your own parents. My mother took a different approach. Please, Aria, your father didn't mean those things. He was just upset that day. We're your family. Where will we go if you sell our home? I've always defended you to your father. How can you do this to me? Thomas alternated between his father's threats and attempts at manipulation. Hey sis, I know things got heated, but we can work this out as a family. No need for lawyers. You've always been jealous that Dad loves me more. Is that what this is really about? If you go through with this, you're dead to all of us. Is that what you want? I forwarded all messages to Amanda without responding and blocked their numbers. But they weren't done. 3 days after our confrontation, as I was leaving my office building, I found all 3 of them waiting in the lobby. We need to talk, my father announced loudly as clients and colleagues looked on curiously. This isn't the place, I said quietly, and I have nothing more to say that hasn't been communicated through my attorney. Now you're too good to talk to your own parents. He raised his voice clearly, hoping to create a scene that would embarrass me into compliance. It was a tactic he'd used throughout my childhood public humiliation to force obedience, but I wasn't a child anymore. Sir, if you don't leave, I'll have to call security, the receptionist said, reaching for the phone. Do you know what your colleague is doing? My mother asked, tearfully, addressing the receptionist. She's making her own parents homeless. After all we've sacrificed for her. Security arrived before I had to respond, and my family was escorted out, my father shouting about ingratitude and betrayal the entire way. I stood there shaking but upright as curious colleagues watched. Family drama, I said with a forced smile. Sorry about that. Later that day, my boss called me into his office. I was prepared for questions about the scene in the lobby, maybe even concern about how it might affect our professional image. Instead, he surprised me. Aria, I want you to know that whatever's happening in your personal life, we support you. And if anyone gives you trouble here, let me know immediately. I hadn't expected compassion, and it nearly broke my composure. Thank you. It means a lot. By Friday, the situation had escalated. My parents reached out to extended family telling their version of events that I'd had some kind of mental breakdown and was vindictively trying to make them homeless. Distant aunts and uncles I barely spoke to called to talk sense into me. Family friends expressed their shock at my behavior. But Sophia had good news. After just one day of showings, we had 3 offers on the house. The highest was $835,000, $5,000, over asking from a young couple who could close quickly. They're pre-approved and can close in 2 weeks, she told me. It's a clean offer, no contingencies. I accepted immediately. When my family learned of the accepted offer, they made one final desperate attempt to stop the sale. Thomas showed up at my apartment late at night, clearly intoxicated. "You can't do this," he slurred, leaning against my doorframe to stay upright. "It's our home." "It's a house you've been living in for free while I paid for it," I replied, keeping the door chain latched. "And it's sold. Go home, Thomas. We'll fight this in court. Dad's talking to lawyers. He won't win. The mortgage is in my name, I've made every payment, and I have documentation of everything. If he wants to waste money on legal fees to delay the inevitable, that's his choice." Thomas's expression shifted from belligerence to a poor attempt at brotherly affection. "Come on, Arya, we're family. Remember when we were kids and I'd help you with your science projects? You can't just throw away all those years of history." The manipulation was so transparent now. "You never helped me with science projects, Thomas. I helped you with yours while you played video games and took credit for my work, just like you've been taking credit for my financial support all these years." His facade crumpled. "You think you're so much better than us with your fancy job and your fancy clothes, but you're nothing without family. You'll end up alone and miserable. I'd rather be alone than surrounded by people who hate me. Goodbye, Thomas." I closed the door on his continued protests and called the building security to escort him out. 2 days later, the buyer's final walkthrough was scheduled. My parents had been notified but refused to leave the house during the appointment. Sophia called me in a panic. "Your father is following the buyers around, telling them about plumbing issues that don't exist and saying the foundation is cracked. He's trying to tank the sale." I called Amanda, who immediately filed for a temporary restraining order preventing my parents from interfering with the sale. The judge granted it that same day, and a copy was delivered to the house by a court officer. It was a decisive moment. My father, who had always used intimidation to get his way, was now legally barred from the property during showings and inspections. The power dynamic had completely reversed. The sale closed exactly 2 weeks later without my presence or my family's. I received a check for $835,000, from which I paid off the remaining mortgage balance of $412,000. The rest, over $400,000, was mine to rebuild my life with. My family had to vacate the property within 48 hours of closing. I didn't go to watch them leave. I didn't need to see the house one last time. Whatever childhood memories it held were tainted now by the knowledge of what had happened within those walls. It was over. I had done what I needed to do to break free. But freedom, I was learning, came with its own complex emotions. The weeks following the house sale brought unexpected developments. My family didn't become homeless despite their dramatic predictions. They rented a 3-bedroom apartment in a neighboring town using part of the house sale proceeds that had been legally required to go to them as the deed holders after the mortgage was paid off. I learned this from my Aunt Eliza, my mother's sister, who lived in another state. She called me about a month after the sale. "I wanted to check on you," she said. "Your mother's been telling everyone a very different story than what I suspect is the truth." I braced myself for more guilt trips, but instead, Aunt Eliza surprised me. "I've suspected for years that your father wasn't treating you right," she continued. "The way he talked about you, always with that undercurrent of criticism even when you were achieving so much. It wasn't normal, Arya. Her validation brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I'd thought I was the problem, that if I just tried harder or achieved more, I could earn the love that seemed to come so easily to Thomas. Why didn't you ever say anything? I asked. I tried in the beginning. Your mother shut me down immediately, defended your father no matter what. Eventually, I stopped visiting as much. I couldn't bear to watch it happen and be helpless to stop it. She paused. I should have tried harder, spoken directly to you when you were old enough to understand. I'm sorry I didn't. That conversation opened a floodgate. Other relatives began to reach out, sharing their own observations of my father's behavior over the years. It turned out many had seen the dynamic but felt powerless to intervene in what was considered private family business. My cousin Julia revealed that my father had treated his own siblings similarly in their youth, creating competition and favoritism that continued to this day. It's a pattern that goes back generations, she explained. Your grandfather was the same way with him. Understanding the generational nature of the abuse didn't excuse it, but it helped me contextualize what had happened. My father had been recreating the family system he knew, casting me in the role he'd seen played by others, perhaps even himself. Meanwhile, I was continuing my sessions with Dr. Lauren, working through the complex grief of losing my family, not to death, but to the realization that the relationship I thought we had never truly existed. What you're experiencing is called ambiguous loss, she explained. Your family is still physically present in the world, but the relationship you believed in has died. It's a particularly difficult type of grief to process. The grief came in waves. Some days I could focus on work, reconnect with friends I'd neglected while prioritizing family obligations, even feel excitement about my future. Other days, a song or smell would trigger memories of happier times, moments when I'd believed my family loved me, and I'd find myself sobbing in my car or shower. Those good memories are real, Dr. Lauren assured me. You can treasure them without using them to excuse the abuse. Both realities existed simultaneously, which is part of what makes this so confusing. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that my father had experienced health problems after the move. High blood pressure that required medication, exacerbated by the stress of the situation. Part of me felt guilty, the old programming rising up to make me feel responsible for his well-being. But Dr. Lauren helped me see that his health was his responsibility, not mine. You didn't cause his high blood pressure by standing up for yourself, she said firmly. His own behavior and his reaction to consequences caused his stress. As for my career, I eventually rescheduled the meeting with Jackson Properties and accepted their offer to head the new residential division. The increased income and professional recognition might once have been primarily valued as ways to finally win my father's approval. Now they were simply personal achievements, valuable for my own satisfaction. I bought a new car to replace the aging sedan I'd kept far too long because every spare dollar had gone to my family. I took a vacation to Italy, a trip I'd dreamed of for years, but had always deferred as too expensive or too self-indulgent while paying my family's bills. Most significantly, I purchased my own home, a sunlit condo with large windows and a terrace overlooking a park. It was half the size of my parents' house, but it was mine, filled with furniture and art I'd chosen, not obligations and criticism. 6 months after the sale, my mother reached out via email. Her message was different from her earlier pleas, lacking the manipulative guilt trips and martyrdom. I've been doing a lot of thinking about our family, especially my role in what happened, she wrote. I failed you as a mother by not protecting you from your father's criticism and by enabling his behavior. I can't change the past, but I want you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry for the pain I've caused. I read the email multiple times, searching for the hidden hooks of manipulation I'd become so adept at recognizing. But it seemed genuinely remorseful. She didn't ask for money, didn't demand forgiveness, didn't even request a response. After discussing it with Dr. Lauren, I sent a brief acknowledgement thanking her for the apology, but making no promises about future contact. It was a small opening, a crack in the door I'd firmly closed, but nothing more. My father never apologized. According to what I heard through family channels, he maintained that I was the one who had betrayed the family, that his words had been taken out of context, that I had overreacted to normal family criticism. Thomas followed his lead, continuing to paint me as mentally unstable and vindictive in social media posts I occasionally saw screenshots of from concerned friends. The holidays were the hardest. Thanksgiving had always been at my parents' house, with me bringing expensive wine and helping my mother in the kitchen while my father and brother watched football. Christmas meant carefully chosen gifts that were rarely acknowledged as thoughtfully as those exchanged between my father and Thomas. For my first Thanksgiving alone, Jessica insisted I join her family's celebration. I brought the wine out of habit, but instead of it disappearing into my father's collection, Jessica's parents made a toast to friendship and new beginnings. When I teared up, no one told me I was being too emotional or making a scene. Jessica's mother simply squeezed my hand under the table, a silent acknowledgement of what I'd lost and what I was gaining. For Christmas, I decided to create entirely new traditions. I volunteered at a local shelter serving meals, then hosted a small gathering for friends who, like me, were separated from family by distant circumstance or choice. We exchanged silly gifts, played board games, and laughed until midnight. It wasn't the Norman Rockwell family Christmas I'd always longed for, but it was warm and genuine in a way my family gatherings had never been. As the one-year anniversary of the fateful phone call approached, I reflected on how far I'd come. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had changed shape, becoming less acute, more manageable. I'd learned to recognize the critical inner voice that sounded suspiciously like my father and replace it with gentler self-talk. I discovered that I could build meaningful connections with people who valued me for exactly who I was, not who they demanded I become. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes walking away isn't a failure or an act of weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest choice you can make. It's been exactly 1 year since the day my father forgot to hang up the phone, and I heard the truth that changed everything. 1 year since I discovered that the family I'd sacrificed so much for had been mocking me behind my back. 1 year since I made the decision to stop seeking love from people incapable of giving it. The journey hasn't been easy. There were nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I'd made the right choice. Days when I nearly called them to apologize, to return to the familiar pattern of seeking approval I knew I'd never receive. Moments when I questioned whether I was the problem after all. But with each passing month, the fog of self-doubt has lifted a little more. I can see now how deeply my sense of self-worth had been damaged by years of criticism and conditional love. I understand that my compulsive need to take care of my family, even at my own expense, wasn't generosity, but a desperate attempt to earn the love that should have been freely given. In therapy, Dr. Lauren helped me recognize that the critical voice in my head wasn't my own, but an internalized version of my father's judgments. "Would you speak to a friend the way you speak to yourself?" she asked me once. The question stopped me cold. Of course I wouldn't. I would never tell a friend they were worthless unless they achieved perfection, that their accomplishments were luck rather than skill, that they were fundamentally unlovable. So why was I saying these things to myself? Learning to silence that voice has been the hardest part of my healing journey. It still pipes up sometimes when I make a mistake or face rejection. But now I can recognize it for what it is, not truth but conditioning, and choose to respond with the compassion I'd offer a friend. My relationship with money has changed dramatically as well. For years, I lived frugally while sending large sums to my family, believing it was my duty, that their needs automatically outweighed my own. Now I'm learning to spend on things that bring me joy without guilt, to save for my own future, to see financial resources as tools for building the life I want, rather than purchasing approval I'll never receive. I've decorated my condo in bright colors my father would have called garish and attention-seeking. I've taken up painting, something I loved as a child, but abandoned because my father said it was a waste of time that wouldn't lead to a career. I've dated men my father would have disapproved of for various superficial reasons, focusing instead on how they treat me and how I feel in their presence. Last month, I met Richard, a landscape architect who listens when I speak and asks questions because he's genuinely interested in my answers. Our relationship is new, but it feels different from my previous patterns of seeking emotionally unavailable men who replicated my dynamic with my father. With Richard, I don't feel the constant anxiety of trying to earn approval. I don't apologize for having opinions or taking up space. I'm learning what it means to be valued simply for being myself. My mother and I exchange occasional emails. Our relationship is tentative, fragile, but evolving. She started therapy herself, beginning to untangle her own patterns of enabling and compliance. She left my father briefly after the house sale, staying with a friend for 2 months, before returning under conditions she didn't share with me. I don't know if they'll last, but I recognize that her journey is separate from mine now. My father and Thomas remain unchanged, at least in their attitude toward me. They've created a narrative where I'm the villain, and perhaps they need that story to avoid facing their own behavior. I've accepted that I may never have the father I longed for, the one who would be proud of me, simply for being his daughter, who would love me unconditionally and support my dreams. That grief will always be part of me, a shadow that lengthens and shortens, but never completely disappears. But here's what I've learned through all of this. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up for you, who celebrates your successes without resentment, who holds space for your pain without using it against you. By that definition, Jessica, Dr. Lauren, my Aunt Eliza, my new friends and colleagues, even Richard, have become more family to me than the people who share my DNA ever were. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to close the door on those who cannot see your value. I didn't just sell a house that day, I bought back my future. Have you ever had to walk away from a relationship that was hurting you more than helping you? Share your story in the comments below. And if you found something valuable in my journey, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit we deserve better, even from the people who are supposed to love us most. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth isn't determined by those who cannot see it clearly.